everybody, and welcome back to a Wednesday afternoon here on Kobold Press, where we are chilling for Kobold Chats. Boy, have I got beans to spill today. I got beans. I technically, I think, spilled the beans a little about it, but, like, not a lot about it. Oh, I got beans. And you know what? We may spill them all today, so I hope you're ready to roll for an explosion. That being said, we just started a new Kickstarter. Actually, it's like a mini starter, or like a short Kickstarter, for the Deep Magic spell cards, right? So if you were a backer for Deep Magic and loved it, as all of us did, because of the incredible collection of spells, you can now get like your hands on cards, based on, I believe they're organized by class, to pass out to your players at the table, which is really swell, especially for those of us that are starting that process. And look, we launched this morning and we're already almost halfway to our goal there on Kickstarter. So
typical Kobold Press Kickstarter right there.
Yeah, yes, expect nothing less. It's just, y'all, they look so good. And actually, I'm gonna stop talking about it for just a second, and I'm gonna play you a little video. Or a little video for it, and then we'll come back, and I'll share some of the, like, detailed images and stuff with all of you. So, here we go.
Imagine eldritch lore at your fingertips. Seize the power of the dark void or the blood within and shape it to your will. Channel divine might or unleash an apocalypse. These are Deep Magic spell cards. Choose Bard, Cleric, or Druid, Paladin, or Ranger, Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard. 1,400 spell cards in all, suitable for the 5th edition of the world's most popular role-playing game. Command Winter's Might, or unleash hieroglyphic enchantments. Plunder the forbidden arcana of elves, or dragons. Or break reality itself with temporal incantations. The choice is yours. Deep Magic spell cards. The power of the cosmos in the palm of your hand.
And we are back from our minor break to tell you a little bit more about the swell thing that is the Deep Magic cards. I hope y'all liked that. I was just commenting while we were watching it. The art is always so good. Is it just me, or does Kobold Press have the best art? Well, enough about Deep Magic cards, spell cards, because we're going to hopefully watch that ticker just, like, keep going and keep going and keep going up as we have today's episode. But today's episode is not about Deep Magic cards. I'm sure when I finally hopefully get my deck of 1,400 cards, I'll be able to go through them for all of you. Today we are here to talk about a topic that really is selfish for me and Mr. Tarrasque. Mr. Tarrasque, tell everybody who you are, and we'll tell everybody what we're talking about.
Well, first of all, if you want me to talk about Deep Magic cards for an hour, I can probably manage. It's no problem. Because if there's anybody from Kobold Press watching, please send me a pack. Love to review them. I'm really waiting for them. Anyway, yeah, I'm Mr. Tarrasque. Mr. Tarrasque, like you say, I have a YouTube channel where I review all kinds of third-party Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition related products, mostly books, as you see behind me, since D&D products are mostly books, right? And I'm a big fan of Kobold Press, and I fell in love with Kobold Press from the first time I opened the book, partly due to the art, like you said. The art from Kobold Press is always amazing.
Do you have a favorite piece?
Yeah,
I have to know. Do you have a favorite art piece? Like the one that just, like,
oh wow,
blew you
yeah,
away?
it must be the first thing that comes to mind for me is the gnome riding the wolf type. What is the name of those gnomes? I think they're in the Midgard Heroes Handbook.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about. Oh, I don't have a hard copy of that.
There is this gnome that, like, if we're talking about, like, there's this gnome. Is there a gnome? Gnomes 21, page 21. No, it's not this book. No, it's a halfling. Sorry, it's a halfling.
Oh, it's a halfling, not a gnome. Okay.
This one. Here it is. This one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's very cool.
This must be my favorite art piece ever. And then there's the Piney. The Piney.
Piney.
Well, I say female, but Pineys aren't female, but, like, female Piney looks really, really cool. But yeah, it's. I mean, that's all new art to me. But like when I opened the first Kobold Press books, when I did like my channel for a month or 2 months, I already was getting Kobold Press books, and I immediately was like, wow, this is
Yeah.
like, yeah,
It's just the artwork.
yes.
It truly is like the artwork. It always just gets me. Plus,
Mhm.
and well, I feel lucky to get to have one of our artists make character art as well for some of these. So, yeah,
Yeah, and we are people, so we judge books by their cover.
it's literally. I mean, it is a book with a cover. Might as well, right? Some of our
Yeah.
cover art. Actually, I think I always like to see our chapter art, right? So one of the really cool things in pre-production is getting to see the artwork laid out that's supposed to expand across 2 pages, because it doesn't. It's like an obscure size, and when it prints to page, you know, there's clearly like the spine down the middle, right? But to get to see the art across the whole thing, the whole finished piece, is always like one of my favorite things. I think our chapter cover art is some of my favorite. Tales of the Old Margrave does have a pretty dope cover art piece too.
Yeah, and there's some moth in there, which is one of my favorite creatures to put against the big moth creature, the flying thing, the abomination, and it's so well drawn. Like the colors, they're so vibrant, and that's the thing with Kobold Press art. There's always like this vibrance in the colors, if it's even a thing. It's like that pops out in some way. It pops out of the book, which is really, really great.
Yeah, it really jumps out at you.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I'm glad you're back, because today, it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of I'm going to call it a selfish topic, only because from the moment we sat down, man, the rabbit holes we got down talking about pop culture and contemporary stuff and like the things that inspired us growing up. And, I say that because today's topic is actually about that. We're gonna talk about our inspirations and the way that we bring kind of contemporary or popular references, culture, movies, books, the works into our campaigns, and how that inspires us as a GM and a storyteller, which I think is a really kind of fun topic. So, you know, possible spoilers ahead, everybody, and definitely lots of references. So, you know, puns not included. So, I have to know, because we all have that one piece of like book or comic or thing from our childhood that really inspired you to consume more, right? That thing that was like, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. Now I have to read every fantasy novel. Or like, here's that piece of art that was like, what is this magical thing? I have to know more. What was it that really just like big inspiration?
Well, for me, I've never been a reader in my childhood. I was one of those kids that felt like it was too cool to read, right? So I picked up reading after together with a girl that reads a lot, and then seeing that reading is actually very cool and amazing. So no, but for me, it always has been movies, especially the late 70s. 80s, and I'm from 87, so I'm not really an 80s kid. I didn't grow up in the 80s, but I have a bigger brother who was always in the 80s, and he showed me movies like the original Star Wars trilogy, and he showed me movies like, I was way too young to watch RoboCop, but I watched RoboCop. Still to this day, I am not able to watch it again because it scared the living crap out of me the first time I saw it. It's so violent. And I saw Jaws on a completely like the wrong moment in my life. But I absolutely love 80s movies. And for me, the best ever made is Back to the Future. Period. And there's just no discussion for me.
This show is now done. He has made his point.
Yeah. No, I mean, even if it's not your type of movie, like, you know, it's like Jurassic Park, for example. Even if it's not your type of movie, I mean, the storytelling,
perfect.
Everything is so well done. And there's movies that aren't my type of movie, but when I see them, I recognize they're good movies.
Yes.
And they're not, even if they're not like for me.
It seems that chat is really behind on this. We have had quite a few people say that Back to the Future is by far one of which is really interesting, right? Because when we think about the things that inspire us, this is a movie that is technically based in science fiction, time travel, right? It's actually, and I guess you could call that fantasy as well, but really...
And it has one special effect. It is a science fiction film with one special
effect, right?
That's just a bunch of lightning and on a car. That's everything they do. But for me, Back to the Future, especially the ending, Act 3 of Back to the Future, for me is like the pinnacle of storytelling. Robert Zemeckis, the director, he puts suspense upon suspense upon suspense. Right? You got the suspense of like, okay, Marty has to go in this car and has to touch the wire on the right time. That's the suspense of right? And that's enough for you to sit on the edge of your chair, right? But then the cable loosens and Doc has to go up to the clock tower. That's suspense number 2. Then the cable loosens on the floor and he has to go back down, and that's suspense number 3. And then on top of all of that, the freaking DeLorean won't start.
Yep.
That's number 4. And all of that together, for me, I can watch that scene a gazillion times and still be on like the edge of my chair, just sitting there. Come on. And I don't know. It's the most amazing thing, storytelling wise. And that's just the way you tell a story for me. Yeah. That's,
Like to keep your players like on the edge of your seat, right?
Yeah, and Robert Zemeckis is the king of that storytelling. I mean, he's the person that makes you care about a volleyball and Cast Away.
It's true, a completely inanimate object.
Yeah, that's so he makes all these. He's like, for me, the best storyteller on film that ever lived. Well, he still lives, but
yeah.
So for me personally.
Interesting. So how do you take things like that? Because I imagine that's not the only inspiration. Clearly, a very passionate one, though.
Yeah. Sorry.
I can
get very passionate about some stuff.
I love it. So how do you take that? You take that aspect of like build that suspense of being able to put such empathy behind an inanimate object, or have so much empathy for an inanimate. How do you take those things and put it into your games?
Well, it's often like I said this last time. I think it's a matter of giving every character, even if it's an inanimate object, giving every character like one distinct feature, right? And that's really important. And for example, the bully from Back to the Future, he's like this dude that always goes, "Hey, McFly!" One thing that's really distinct about him, and that really brings people in. But
Biff.
For D&D, I don't really look at Back to the Future. I'm just very passionate about Back to the Future. For D&D, for me, it's more cliche, like Lord of the Rings.
Oh, really?
We all have played a campaign where somebody went, "You shall not pass." But also like the Goonies.
Yes, the Goonies, I find, there are a lot of those, like, 80s movies about kids that I tend to find a lot of inspiration out of, right? I don't know why I'm drawn to that kind of story, like the kids overcome this great, epic thing that they should never be able to, like, overcome. I'm really drawn to that kind of a story.
Yeah, and basically Goonies is just like a dungeon crawl. It's a classic dungeon crawl. It's a bunch of kids that find a map to a treasure, and they want to go in, find that treasure, and there's a bunch of traps, there's bad guys. That's just a classic dungeon crawl, and that's perfect for, like, if you can get that vibe into your D&D game, then you've got a vibe going.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's so weird because, like, I remember reading a lot more sci-fi growing up than reading fantasy. I didn't start reading fantasy until much later in my adult life. And I don't know why. I think it was actually, I blame Dune. It was Dune that did it. I remember reading Dune. I was 13, and that kind of just like, it broke me in terms of like everything from that point forward that I read was like a lot of sci-fi. Then I read all this Philip K. Dick, and that says everything about my personality. But like, it's interesting because I think sometimes I do actually pull even these like futuristic things or like these movies, right? Like I think about Jurassic Park. That is a perfect film. The way, as you said, the way that the suspense is built of like, you start this movie thinking, "Oh my God, this is a movie about a dinosaur theme park."
Yeah, it feels magical.
It feels so beautiful. It's like going to Disney.
It's like, oh yeah, theme park, yeah.
Right.
And you're in this helicopter flying to the island.
You're like, this is so cool. This is everything that I, as a '90s kid, have ever dreamed of ever having. And then you realize that it is not about that. It is about hubris.
It becomes a horror film.
And it becomes a horror movie. Like, the instant that cup, like, boofs and, like, wiggles, it's over. It is over. It's like,
well, that's a perfect D&D moment. That is a perfect D&D moment. That cup, if you could like tell that to your players, like, you see this water move in a cup. Like, if you can get that feeling from the movie to your players at a point where, like, there is a dragon coming or something, breathing, and you can feel the wind of the dragon breath in your hair. That's basically the same thing, right?
Yeah.
That's storytelling. I don't know if you ever noticed with Jurassic Park, but before the dinosaurs come, right in the middle of the movie, they start with the dinosaurs. They are all filmed from an above perspective, humans, and later in the film they're all filmed from a.
Oh, interesting! It changes the perspective.
So So at the first half of the movie, the humans are playing God, like they are
right.
Right, and in the second half of the movie, the humans are the puny humans. So they're being filmed more from top up, top down. Like, so that's kind of storytelling that's really interesting. You can also do that in a story without using a camera. You can actually say, like, when you start your characters, you can have them feel, like we said, you can have them do Dip's fortress, right? The Impregnable Fortress Dip, and have them feel great and everything, and they're the big adventurers, but then suddenly they come across something they probably can't handle. They're working against all odds, and if you can really make that shift in your game, like, you're great adventurers and all, and you're all tough, and you're all, like, in, and you're beating everybody's ass, and you're all wrestling and everything, but then suddenly something pops up, like in the Ravenloft setting, stuff like that, right? That stuff is bigger than the players. And suddenly you have this top-down thing where your players are like, wow, this is really bad, and we need to go fix this, although we are against all odds. Yeah. That's really great storytelling. A movie that can do that with the camera. But you can also do that in your storytelling, like a good book. It's the same. I don't know if you ever read the book The Martian.
Yes. Yeah,
the book. In the beginning of the book, it's all like, science is great, science is good, this, and we're going to Mars and everything. And in the later half of the book, it's more like, oh shit,
we're on Mars.
It's that shift. It's that shift of going from top to bottom to.
Yeah, it's almost like your stake. It's that moment. It's that like when your stakes, the stakes of for the characters shift, right? Right. Somebody made a good draw to Independence Day, right? Independence Day is one of those movies that, like, regardless of whether you like it in total or not, because it's Independence Day, but the creep effect of the aliens, the extraterrestrials that come here, being our friends is legit, and the whole time the impending doom of knowing it's almost like a Lovecraftian horror in that way, right? And all these people are standing on that building, and they're like, we come in peace, it's gonna be awesome, and you're like, I'd be with those folks on the top of that building holding that. Oh my god, it's that, like, instant shift of stakes for everybody.
And they do that with the scene where the alien takes over the doctor. That's like the scene that really says, like, these aliens are bad motherfuckers.
Yeah, they're bad, right? So that's really interesting, because I think as a GM, I'm always looking for ways or moments that I can, things that in those movies, like, really impacted me, like growing up, or in those books that really impacted me. How do I draw from that and then bring that level of stakes to the table? How do I keep making the suspense bigger? How do I set up the fear that comes from just watching water ripple in a cup, right? It is one of, still to this day, that ripple of that freaking cup is embedded in my psyche. It is one of the most terrifying moments of film for a 7-year-old Dot. I think I was 7.
Oh, yeah, that's young.
Right? Right? Yeah. I was a kid. It was like, what, 94?
I think it's 93, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, so even I might have been 4 or 5 years old. Like, I remember hiding under a blanket in my living room because we rented it on VHS. Right, and so like
And the dinosaurs still look realer than everything. More
right,
than
and
everything,
and then
they're-
that's another thing, right? Like the craft that goes into telling a story, and we can get all into like I really love like practical visual effects. I love puppetry work. I just think part of the magic of filmmaking is sometimes lost deep into CGI, but that's a whole other story. But how do I bring that kind of level of excitement to a world? Because I want my players to buy in as much as I buy into watching these other people on a screen. I want to feel that moment of the water, like the tenseness, that shifting of a camera angle. How do you share the shift of a camera angle, right? Because visually, when we watch the movie, that says one thing, but can we bring that to our games on the table, which is, I think, always a challenge for a GM and kind of inspirational, really.
That's the art of. That's why I love theater of the mind. That's why I will always choose theater of the mind above miniature play. And I have nothing against miniature play. I play in games where where the dungeon master chooses to use miniatures, and I'm completely fine with that. But me as a dungeon master, my style is absolutely 100%, 110 theater of the mind, because you can sit down, take your time to describe a scene as if you are like the writer of Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The writer of Lord of the Rings name. What's his name? Wait. Tolkien.
Tolkien.
Okay. He can sit down and describe a scene like your players go to an island where there's the stench of undead, and there's this church, and there's a church sitting on top of an idle rock, and there's these cliffs, and the waves are clashing into these. You can describe this whole scene like there's moss creeping up on the church, and like you smell the stench of death and decay and like all that stuff. If you sit down and you describe that stuff, that I think you're really you can really draw your players in. But I think the most important part is feeling it yourself. Yes. I think if you feel it yourself, then you can put that on your players. It's like a radiant magic. Like if you feel suspense yourself, then if you that's people always joke like, hey, you laugh with your own jokes, and I'm always like, yeah, of course I laugh with my own jokes.
Yeah, I'm here to laugh.
If I didn't think they were funny, I wouldn't make them, right? So that's the same thing. If you laugh at your own jokes, people are going to think it's funny. If you are legitimately scared of what you're bringing, then people. It's like me. I said this in one of our talks, like doing this carnival horror type of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't like being on the receiving end of that, but I love bringing that to the table, and I am known to be really creepy with that kind of horror, especially if there's like little girls in white dresses involved.
Yeah.
I am legitimately scared of that, so I can radiate that to my players. I can put that on my players, and I think they're also feeling that in a way. Maybe not to the same extent, but I'm always like saying it's like Batman. You use your own fear in order to get that across to your players.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, I wonder, chat was saying this too. Is there a difference in that great description you're talking about versus seeing like a chest, the mimic chest with teeth, right? Which is like, oh, I can see it now, but I'm not seeing it in my mind's eye. I'm not living that theater of the mind, as you said. I feel that way sometimes about NPCs too. Like, I used to do a lot of mini painting a way long dot ago in a galaxy far, far away, but like I did some mini painting and I loved it. And one of the things that I often painted were my NPCs, because as a GM, I love my NPCs. But one of the things that has made my NPCs better over the years is actually getting away from feeling like I have to define them, that actually they become very defined when my players meet them. Because sometimes I develop an NPC and my players are like, get out of here, that's boring. And they don't interact with it. They don't, they're like, oh, cool, the hat shop guy. Like, okay, I'll make a prime example. I made this NPC I was so excited about for this campaign. It was this owl-like character that set up in this tree. It was like ancient. It had all the stories, and it watched over this tree. And it was this big character. And it was going to told them the location, and it was kind of like a midway point in trying to get them onto the next phase of the adventure. And all they wanted, they were like, can we get a guide? And I was like, sure, I'll give you a guide. I have a friend. And so I made up a character on the spot that was basically a unicorn that just showed up, and literally the unicorn's only job was going to be to just guide them, like lead them where they were going. They didn't give a crap about the owl after that. All they cared about was this unicorn. So they cast all this magic on this unicorn to be able to like communicate with it, to make it like super intelligent. And now this unicorn that I had not planned, I had planned all this stuff with this owl. This unicorn became their like bestest, favoritist thing. So I say that because I think what's so interesting is when I stopped trying to like manage my NPCs and let my players build them, I'm able to do a lot more and draw a lot more inspiration from the other things that I've seen. Like, when's the best time to kill an NPC? How do you do that? I think about the NPC death in Jurassic Park. Clever girl, right?
Yeah.
That is just an NPC death that just sets up the stakes of Velociraptors. That's what that does. That is that whole scene. His death is used to set the stakes. And so when I sometimes when I pre-develop my NPCs too much, I don't get that chance to like breathe and find where the other inspirations can kind of come in and overlap and create a ridiculous unicorn character that becomes like a leading NPC in the story. So like yeah, I say that because I find that sometimes I do that even with my NPCs, which is my favorite thing about developing in a campaign as a GM is like, how do I interact? What do I give them to interact with? And much like locations, I think if you do too much like, well, this is what the location looks like, or here's a map. Now you've taken all the fun out of like describing it and being able to taste the salt water in the air and like smell, like you said, the foul stench of the undead. So yeah.
There's also like with the NPCs, it's also like a matter of I think character development is something that's really important. Not only for player characters, but like for NPCs or whatever. Like for example, if you see these modern movies, often then like a new character comes in and they are the way they are, and you just need to accept that as a viewer, right? And then they add a new character and they are the way they are, and maybe there's like a quick backstory, but they just explain the backstory like he was a guy who was blah, 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 blah. But like with Jurassic Park again, you've got this character development, right? You got these people that are digging up dinosaurs, and they're evolving into these people that in when they're in danger, they can take care of each other, and they become adventurers. Like this leading character, he hates kids, right? At the beginning of the movie, he doesn't want to sit in the same car.
Yeah, he doesn't even want to be near
them. Then they put the kids in the car, but then suddenly he starts saving the kids, and he's like this adventure dude that repels from a. Right, so that's character development right there.
Yeah.
You care about that. There's not suddenly a dude that comes save the day and save some children. There's not like this dude that, right? So, I think that's really important. I think there's more character development in the old Rambo movies than there is in modern movies. That's how much I hate modern flicks right now. But
yeah, there's definitely, it's harder and harder because, at what point are we coming up with new ideas and what point are we recycling ideas, right? When somebody earlier was like, please don't ever remake Back to the Future. It's the perfect, right?
Oh, please.
People would riot. People would literally burn down Hollywood, I think, if you tried to remake that movie. I think there are a few movies like that people would just stand.
Yeah, Robert Zemeckis said it was not going to happen as long as he lives, but yeah, the man has to die someday.
Yeah,
so,
which is scary. That's a scary thought. So, but
well, to be fair, I saw a fan trailer for a Future 4 on YouTube, and this guy used a lot of like images from different movies and from Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd and all kinds, and from the DeLorean and different movies, and he made like this perfect Back to the Future 4 trailer, and I was like, yeah, I could get excited for that. That would be so cool, but it was of course fan made. But yeah. I think they're redoing everything, but if they ever redo Back to the Future, I would lose my shit.
Me too. I don't know that I could stand for such things. I mean, I'll be honest. I remember even the first time I watched. You mentioned Star Wars earlier, another like trilogy, and it's very easy to like reference that because now more than ever, it's very mainstream. But I remember I was kind of an ill child, and I had spent a period of time. I had to spend a period of time in quarantine in my home, and I was very, very young, and I just come out of the hospital, and I remember my parents had the original. They were on VHS. They had the original trilogy on VHS, and my mom was like, "I think maybe you'll like this," and I probably watched that trilogy on repeat for weeks. And it was so influential to me, like all the twists and turns, realizing now Dot could say these words. Young Dot could not, but basically realizing that like the protagonist might actually be Anakin, right? Not, or might be Darth Vader. We didn't know it was Anakin at the time. Darth Vader, right? And not just Luke. It's not just about Luke's story. It's and then, you know, as I got older and I started reading a lot more mythology and seeing a lot of the ties to the struggle of like father to son and a lot of, you know, okay, I could go into all those details, but that movie, that original trilogy inspired me so much, and still does as a GM, in terms of like how I build heists, right? Or how you go undercover, right? Of how the sacrifices of characters like Han Solo can be so impactful. How NPCs like Lando Calrissian can still like totally steal the show, and convince you that like some characters just walk a gray line, and that's Lando Calrissian. How inanimate objects, magical items like the Millennium Falcon can be their own character.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And there's actually a very important storytelling lesson we can learn from Star Wars, the original trilogy, and that is, it is okay to not know exactly what you're going to tell in the next episodes. You can really see from the first movie, which was a low budget crap movie.
Yep.
Very
much so.
It almost completely failed if George Lucas's wife wouldn't have saved it.
Right, I was about to say, she stepped in and kind of helped.
Yeah.
That.
But the moment Luke and Leia kiss, right? George Lucas did not know they were brother and sister.
No, he had no plan for that.
He had no idea they were brother. He just wrote that, and it's a process. While it's like the writer of Harry Potter, she didn't know Snape was Snape, right? Spoiler alert, right. Snape's the good guy. In like the first book, she wrote like this creepy. Teacher,
bully.
Right?
He was a bully. Snape was a bully.
Harry Potter, right? Yeah, there was this bully teacher who really had a pick on Harry Potter, but it evolved while she was writing it, and that's the cool part. And that's I think one of the most important things as a dungeon master to do, and that's just take everything you're getting and keep writing. Do not write. I see a lot of new DMs making that mistake. They want to write everything out. They want to create a town that has every NPC, every bartender, every inn, every temple, every freaking library, every book in the freaking library. They want to have that all set in stone. And then when people start improvising, it becomes a problem for them because they don't know, and they're taking their notes, and that's a big problem for new DMs right now at this point. I think it's the biggest problem, and that's like you should be prepared to not be prepared, right? Yeah.
I mean, definitely. Yeah. I think sometimes, when you plan too much is when planning too much can actually stifle a campaign, right? It can totally stifle a campaign. And so having plans but not having the plan, right? Everything planned out to the nines can be actually rather liberating, I find, as a GM, to see what your character or your players bring to the table, because they're going to bring stuff to the table, and sometimes what they bring to the table is way better than what I had planned. Better than what I had planned.
Absolutely.
They make my job so easy.
There's sometimes sometimes you can create a puzzle, right? And then you have this solution in your head, but your players come up with a way better solution to the same puzzle, and you're like, that's the solution. You got it. And you're like, good on you. So, that's the combined storytelling thing about D&D. That's
so collaborative, and if you really want it to be collaborative, you got to give space for that,
A lot of the greatest movies, like especially trilogies and like movies that have more, are good because the directors and the writers took the liberty of writing it while they were writing it, if that makes sense. Like, they were writing, they just came up with stuff while they were writing it, and I think that's really great. So I think that's why Back to the Future 2 and 3 became such a success, especially 3, because they filmed it at almost the same moment like as 2. So
back to back. I was trying to think of other things that I pull, because we named the big ones, like, I know. I tend to draw a lot. I have and still do draw a lot of inspiration on the order and a way in which I tell story or like facilitate story from Guy Ritchie. I love Guy Ritchie movies. I don't know if anybody is a Guy Ritchie fan. Guy Ritchie is a director. He did Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrel and
yes, with the ending,
right. And one of the things that Guy Ritchie does so well is it never leaves you satisfied, which I think is very fun. Like the whole time you get to the end and you're like, wow, that like it's almost like you start with the corners of the puzzle piece, and as his movies goes along, the picture starts to become clearer and clearer, but it starts coming together faster and faster, and by the time the puzzle's put together, you're like, oh my god, it's a picture. Like at the end, there's something about the way and the order in which he tells stories and reveals specific moments, crosses people's paths. Like I think about Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels has that really beautiful moment with the drug dealers, right, where they're they have the house and all of this kind of stuff, and they've set it up like we just think they're a bunch of nobodies and this and this, and then they raid their house, and the woman that's been sleeping on the couch, all of her clothes like blends with it, and nobody saw her because they all failed their perception checks, and she stands up with a machine gun and mows them all down. Now the funny part of that is she doesn't kill anyone, she hits nothing, it's just a spray and pray action. But I just think like little moments like that are moments where I can plan, or I can think through moments for my players. But I draw a lot of inspiration from the orders and the way in which Guy Ritchie weaves story and does it like this character moment and this character moment. These characters have nothing in common. On an average day, their stories would never cross, but today their stories are pinging off of each other.
Yeah, it's like Pulp Fiction.
Just like Pulp Fiction, another great example of how a story is told. Like I think,
but how do you tell that in a D&D story, right? Like Pulp Fiction, how do you do that in D&D? I mean, that's almost impossible to tell it that way. Right?
Yeah, you couldn't tell the whole thing that way. I do a lot. Oftentimes, that way of telling a story where you meet different characters and their paths cross, so we see other paths cross, is actually how I start my stories. It's about the happenstantial way of how these people's paths, especially if they're not coming into the story knowing each other, how these people's paths are crossing in this very moment. And so really it's more of like, if our intro or first 2 sessions together were about learning and getting on the same path, that is the Pulp Fiction moment, right? Where all of our stories are crossing, where our individual paths become one path. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's probably after our talk, I will drive home from where I am right now, and I will probably name like 20 movies that
20 movies. Oh, I should have said that one. And I should have said that one. I should have said that one.
Yeah. There's so many great stories, but they all have one thing in common, and most of the time, and that's they're old. Most of the time, old.
Interesting. Let me see. I'm going to challenge that because I love doing this. What is a new series that really inspired me, that has really inspired me?
What is new? Maybe
that has really inspired me,
like maybe Hunger Games or something like that. I don't know.
No, actually I was not very fond of the Hunger. I that was also like neither, I was a little too like, that was just not my time. What is another great
movies at this moment? I don't know.
Well, you know what, somebody mentioned Doctor Who and talks about the way that Doctor Who like builds an entire season and tells a story. I think that's great. You can look at MCU. I think is a great example of the way to tell epic tell stories of tying characters together and characters that
MCU is really a way of like, they are the kings.
Yes.
Of having everything in order. Like, I mean, there's so little loopholes in there.
Yeah.
Stuff that doesn't work out. If you watch Back to the Future, there's a gazillion loopholes in there. That's like, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. But in the MCU, they have probably like 100 people sitting at the table each day, like making sure every detail works. There's probably still loopholes, right? Because there's like a gazillion movies. But I mean, it is so freaking. I'm not the biggest superhero kind of fan. I mean, I watched them all once, just to.
I can't say that personally.
Sorry, what?
I said I was like, I can't say I've only watched them once. I've watched them quite a few times. I'm a bit of a fan.
Oh yeah, but like the universe, like that makes sense and it all works, and that's like, if those people would build a D&D campaign, I would trust them to build it up front. Like,
for sure.
People I would trust to build up them, like have them build a D&D campaign up front, because that's how much I'm like watching these movies and I'm like, that just makes sense. It's just that's this guy did this in this movie, and she did this in this movie, and they did that, and it all, and then it's this snappy thing where everybody YouTube where they line everybody who disappears, they line everybody up like the moment they disappear, and it all just makes sense that everybody is on that spot at that time, and it just blows my mind how they do that. It really, really blows my mind.
Yeah, gosh, I was just trying to. What are the other ones? Okay, I agree. Okay, so another, to each their own. But Judd Apatow, in terms of comedy, I think is a very modern style of comedy, right? We can also look at things like Community. We can look at, or I look at things like Community or The Office, right? That has this kind of
The Office. I'm such a big fan of The
sense
Office.
of humor that comes from a place of like non-epic people. Like that is the Judd Apatow like formula, right? Let's take a bunch of average people, most of the time dudes. Let's take a bunch of average people, and we're gonna put them in an extremely awkward and high stakes situation. And I heard really good things about Raised by Wolves, Paladin Hulk. A lot of people said that was a really great new show that had a lot of clout to it. But yeah, so like I look at the way he frames movies. Like think about Pineapple Express, which is also, for those of you that have never seen the movie, it's an epic tale of two guys who bring down a drug ring accidentally. It is the perfect model of like how two people end up in an accidental adventure.
Oh, I have a good one. War Dogs.
Yep. There's one.
That's for me. That's like the perfect movie, storytelling wise and humor wise. I mean, that's just it shifts from the storytelling to the side constantly. Of course, you have Jonah Hill doing all that, but
yeah.
I think that's a really good movie of like two guys who absolutely have no idea what they're messing with, and then just doing this crazy adventure, and
ending up like on this thing. I think about what is it? Dale and Tucker Must Die. That's that ridiculous comedy horror movie where like they accidentally end up in a horror. It's so choice. I think about it inspired me to run a campaign. I love Anchorman. I think that movie is so hilarious and so brilliant on so many levels. Right? And I ran an Anchorman campaign using Fate years and years ago. It was called Fate of the Anchorman. It was wonderful. Anyways, but it was so much fun, and I'm so inspired by that story. I'm so inspired by the ridiculousness of the comedy. I'm inspired by the way that story is told in this time period. Right, it's very clearly set in the 70s, and it's got this whole like vibe to it, and like I tend to look a lot to other media and other people, I think, for my inspiration, my games, and then how I skin that, right, like how I take those inspirations and like weave them together, how I use the way that Judd Apatow rolls out story and crossing of paths with the addition of the ridiculous humor of something like Guy Ritchie, and like the humor of Judd Apatow, mixed with my love for Star Wars and the epicness of watching a hero rise. There's this I just think it's really interesting.
Joker. I mean, you hate it or you love it, right? But I really, really loved it. Like, that's something we emphasize with the villain, right?
Yep.
We feel really bad for, like, I feel bad about emphasizing with that dude, because that dude is wicked, right?
Yes, he's broken.
I emphasize with him, and I almost, like, it's really weird feeling of, you're laughing sometimes, but you're like, am I allowed to laugh at this? Especially when you watch it in theater, like, am I allowed to laugh now?
Right.
And I think it's really great for a D&D campaign where if you can build a villain that your players are like on the fence about.
Yeah.
That really spark some really good role playing, especially if your players are like, two characters of the party are like, no, we're keeping him alive because he went crazy because of this reason, and others are like, no, we need to kill him because he's dangerous. And I think if you can build that kind of villain where you emphasize with the villain, who clearly is a villain,
But that's the thing, right? He's not the villain of his story. Batman is.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you look at the perspective of, like, he's not the villain of his story, right? The
Mm-hmm.
corruption and the corporatization and the family of Gotham City, right?
Murray.
Right?
Murray's.
Yeah, is the problem. He's not the bad guy, which I think is also just like, that's just a very interesting, I mean, that even, I draw a lot of inspiration from The Matrix, and we're going to start taking questions, y'all. We're here at our last 10 minutes, so toss them out. But I remember The Matrix being another one of those movies that really, Dot in 1998 or 9, when that happened, was not prepared for how influential that movie would be on me. And I think now I can look on it, and then you add all the rest of the trilogy, but the Animatrix, another brilliant addition to the Matrix, like, story. And at what part do you realize that, like, is the Matrix a story of human survival, or is it a story of human hubris? Because we did this to the machines, right? We enslaved the machines, and they rose up against us, and we lost. And now here we are back in a cycle of where we are now enslaved and trying to rise against them. And so
it's like Battlestar Galactica, right? It's like
yes.
Yeah. I don't know if you read Ready Player One. And
I got the 3 keys on the wall and tattooed on my body. Just saying.
Okay, yeah. I mean, Ready. That's the worst movie adaptation.
What movie? What movie?
yeah. It's like The Hobbit. It doesn't exist. We're not gonna talk about it.
Bad.
But I was just to say, like, Ready Player One is about this nerd, this dude, this outcast who is up against something so huge, and he needs to, like, rally people in order to get it done and everything.
Yeah, he creates, like, it's all
feeling
a
that
rebellion.
that's for me Ready Player One. If you read the book, that is a tabletop RPG sci-fi setting.
It's perfect. He, like, gathers his team. They
he
all
has
bring
an
their
entire
talents
party,
to the table. Yeah, and at the end, they all get to, like, put their talents to good use. That book, I remember that is the first book ever that I picked up, I read, and when I got to the end, I started it over immediately.
I read it when I was
to my core.
I was in Thailand when I accidentally picked it up, and I was 2 weeks in Thailand, and I just read it cover to cover. I was like, wow.
The movie blew my mind. I literally, before the movie came out, I went and had it tattooed on my body, and then I saw the movie, and I was like, well, at least we've got the book. Right? So, but yeah, I would agree. Like, and what's interesting is that book is actually a book all about popular influences.
Yeah,
on storytelling and the idea of the adventure and the rise of the hero.
Everything is in there. Yeah.
From video games. We had a question here. We actually had a couple good questions. So, do you ever ask your players where their inspiration comes from? Because, you might think, oh, I should watch that.
Oh, well, for me, the reason that I am always, like, using cliches out of movies and doing the you shall not pass thing, right? And quoting movies, and that invites people to do the same, right? So, like, people, my players I have a lot of players who also do that from different movies. And sometimes movies I didn't see, or sometimes it's movies I've seen, which, like, really creates a bond. Like, and what I also do is, what some of my players do, I have, like, this one, she watches a lot of anime, right? And she always bases her characters on anime characters. I do not watch anime myself. I cannot stand it. I don't know why. It's just not my thing.
That's all right.
I tried it, but it's not my thing. But she, like, builds a character from an anime character, which makes her really want to play that character because she loves the show and everything. So yeah, I absolutely invite people to use their like, pop culture is part of our childhood. It's part of who we become, who we are. Yep. So it's really important that you can get that into a RPG, because we're playing a ridiculous game, so let's keep it ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's true though, but that's part of it, right? It's like all these inspiration we're drawing from is because they have not only inspired us, but they bring us a level of joy, right?
Yeah.
Watching Back to the Future clearly brought you so much joy that it impacted you in such an immense way. And that level of joy is, I think, at least I know, or I would say, what I'm hoping to bring to the table for my players. I want them to feel that level of joy, that excitement about telling a story, that excitement about making choices, and that excitement around getting to play a character that is set in this world, or whatever that world is, which I think is very cool. Oh, what about art influences? Do you have artists that influence your campaigns? That's a great question. I'll answer that one, but I definitely want to hear.
Yeah, no,
No
no.
artists.
Aside from movies and books, like no, I've never been like into art, like music, of course, but that
Yeah.
doesn't really. I play music sometimes when I
Let's
DM.
see.
It's not that I have like paintings or artwork
Yeah.
that I'm really into or something. No.
Oh, okay. So I ran a campaign one time using inspiration from surrealist art. So they ended up in a world where everything was kind of warped, and there was like a reason for it. But I used surrealist paintings and artwork as like the inspiration for it. So like you'd walk through one door and it wouldn't lead anywhere, or you may end up in a place where like clocks are dripping off trees and the sky is melting into all of these colors. So I did this kind of weird. I wouldn't call it horror, but it was kind of. It gave an eerie feeling.
Like this Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just had I used surrealist artwork to inspire me. So I would say I guess I probably do. And even that music, the podcast I'm a part of, North by Northwest, that I started all those years ago. Our first season, like our first and literal first campaign, was set in a world that our GM created called Lochnar that was based on like rock and roll metal music. So everything had this like 80s vibe. It looked like scenes painted on the side of like vans, like rocker vans and stuff. And so it was called Lochnar. We rode this like super metal elephant type creature, and we played all of our bard like instruments, and there was a battle of the bands at the end. And so I think you can draw inspiration from just about anywhere.
Yeah. What I do is I very often hum themes from movies. That's what I do. Like when people are walking into a mountainside, I do Jurassic Park. When there's little critters coming, then I do the theme from Gremlins. Like the Star Wars Cantina song comes up a lot of the time. So that's what again, it comes from movies, but it is the music. It's strong.
But it sets us in that mood, right? And I think that's what's so cool. Is like it's also there's something about popular culture that becomes a shared language to some degree. When you say and the Cantina songs plays in the background, I would say now about 75% of people would go and start humming the tune to the Cantina song from Star Wars, right? Because we know it. Right? And so we like know it. Or if I'm sure there's like 1,000 things that we could do, right?
Like there's the theme from Jaws, right?
Right. Somebody mentioned that earlier. Like anytime that theme plays,
yeah.
right? It makes.
And I wanted to talk about that. I want to talk about that real quick. If you watch a movie like Jaws, right? And then you watch a movie like The Meg. Like, The Meg is just a bunch of really strong people going to beat the living crap out of a freaking big shark. That's basically the setup of that. There's some story involved, but then there's Jaws, which is like a bunch of small people, very small people, and a big shark that doesn't even show on camera that much. So, I mean, that's how you tell a story. Like Jaws is the perfect storytelling for me.
Yeah, and you compare it again. Compare it to other shark films, and you ask like, what made it so important? Like, what makes it the shark movie in comparison to say,
that's
everything but
Sharknado?
Shark, because we know that
like
it's
the first part of the movie, you don't even see the shark. There's only music and there's a fin and there's no shark.
I was just telling somebody the other day, one of the best lessons that I ever learned as a GM is when to show your villain, when to show the scary thing. Do you know how I learned that? It was actually a movie, Signs. Signs was the scariest movie I had ever seen until they showed me the alien. When they showed it, like when it passed across the TV screen or at the birthday party, I was like, oh my God! Right? Totally scare factor. But the moment they like show it, I was like, not as scary. It's not as scary anymore. It like ruined something, you know. Yeah. It did. I was almost like, I kind of wish you hadn't shown me. You know.
Yeah, that's. I can absolutely relate to that. I've seen that movie a few times actually.
Yeah, so that's another one that I just.
But yeah.
It had that moment where, like, I mean, there's an interesting, M. Night is an interesting person to even talk about if we want to talk about a storyteller, right? Somebody that uses the shock factor and the, like, I tricked you idea to, like, And it works sometimes, and then other times it doesn't, like The Village, for example. Yeah.
Like, I really loved, although might have not been the greatest of movies, but I Am Legend.
Yeah. Yep.
There are some storytelling choices in there that I really like. When he has to kill his dog, like he sits there and he has to kill his own dog because the dog got bitten.
Oh, I remember
That kind of
sobbing.
stuff.
I sobbed in the theater with my best friend. I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for me. That's if you can do that with an NPC, like for example that unicorn.
Yeah.
You can have that perfect moment for it to die, or even your players
Or
might.
to make just a sacrifice,
or-
right? Yeah, to make
yeah,
that
yeah.
great sacrifice for them. Like, and I mean, we've seen that too. It doesn't have to just be animals, but any NPC that makes the great sacrifice can basically set your players all up to work together for something because it's a thing, a person that they all cared about. Gosh, what was that unicorn's name? He had a crazy voice. He talked like this.
Oh no, it was one of those big fluffy unicorns.
Yeah, oh my God, I can't remember. It was for this campaign I ran called The Little Things, where everybody played kids. They played, like, this was before you could play whatever the new one is out there where you can play adolescents in D&D, but so basically they started as 0 level characters and then got to choose their class kind of Kingdom Hearts style as they like leveled up, but they were all kids. They were all and it was kind of a whimsical Alice in Wonderland type thing. You know, the tooth fairies tried to steal all their teeth out of their face and some other stuff like that. But yeah, they met this unicorn. His Jerry. His name was Jerry.
Jerry
the unicorn. Yeah, Gnome did rock that show. So yeah, that's well, any other questions? We're wrapping up here.
Who's your favorite villain? I want to ask you.
My favorite film? Oh damn, that's hard.
Villain, like.
Oh, villain. My favorite villain. Oh, that's hard too.
For me, it has to be Hans Gruber.
Hans Gruber is a great villain.
You know what they say? It ain't Christmas until I saw Hans Gruber falls from a skyscraper. I really like that one.
Until he falls from Nakatomi Plaza. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, until you drop the Hans from Nakatomi, it's not really the holidays. Yeah, a great villain that really. I mean, we could use the great example of Darth Vader. I think Anakin's story is a great example of a villain that we can feel empathy for when you know his story.
Yeah, like in the when the old trilogy was the only thing that existed, then Darth Vader was like this really bad guy, right? But then the prequels trilogy came, and then we were like, oh, okay, he lost his wife.
Yeah.
And he killed his best friend and
yeah, there's so much trauma there that we kind of begin to like see how the dark side used him and not how he used the dark side, you know, which I think is really the shift that begins to happen of how he became a tool himself for Palpatine and all of this. Anyways,
and then there's the sequel trilogy, and that's just one big pile of garbage.
Well, we could talk about how stories don't weave well. That would be a totally
no, but that's another thing with character development, right? That's character development. Like you have Luke Skywalker who trains his freaking ass off to even be able to hit something with a freaking lightsaber, and then you have
Rey.
What's her name? Rey. She takes a lightsaber and she starts doing backflips for some reason. I mean, there's character development. I don't mind Rey doing backflips. I think she looks cool doing backflips, but make her like this farm girl, like
see, and I would much prefer. I didn't
make her work her way up to that moment.
Right, the first movie I was like, look, cool, okay, so you've got some instinctual things here. We saw you kind of fight and be very agile at the top of the first movie, so she's not like she was like a farm, like she was surviving by herself since she was like a kid. So like I buy that. What I would rather have seen is in the second film, if you're gonna pitch to me that she's now a Jedi, I want to see her training, and she very clearly didn't train with Luke. So like it would have been cool to see her train with Leia, but I know that's a whole thing. That's a whole other story for a whole other day around the Star Wars new trilogy, the latter ones. But favorite villain, okay, so I have a couple. Like there's one in particular that I think is really, this movie impacted me. This is another one of those impactful films. It's a movie called The Girl That Walks Home Alone at Night. It's a vampire movie. It's a horror film. And it's just what it sounds like. I believe it's Iranian. It's an Iranian film, and it'll be subtitled. But it is the best. I would hesitate to say one of the best vampire movies you will ever watch ever. ever. It's so brilliant. And the reason is because she's very clearly a vampire, okay? Like, she's hunting and stalking people, but watching her do that, you're like, is she the bad guy? Because the other people around her, like the humans, the people that are supposed to have humanity, are way worse. And there's something about her character that's very, very interesting in the midst of all of that, of like, what is humanity? What is a monster? Why does she walk home alone at night? You know, like, there's some really interesting things. And like, that movie, I remember watching that movie for the first time and just being like moved, so moved to my core. But gosh, I always take a weird stance on villains, because villains are always like, I don't do a lot of curly mustache type villains. That's just like not how I build my villains.
But Hook from
But Hook,
like,
Hook. Yeah. So there's definitely gosh, I don't know. There's so many that I could do. Rufio, right? And another villain character, right? Like a bully type character. Biff. Somebody mentioned Biff. What a great villain. Somebody that, like, oh my God, you just hate. Oh, I can bring this up now. We've been talking backstage for a while about a movie that I love called Weird Science. If you've never seen Weird Science, it's another one of those 80s movies. But there's also, in that movie, the, like, antagonist character is his older brother, Chet. Chet is his name. And he's the worst. Character, right? I got another one. I could make a list of villains forever. Villains, the second Alien movie, right? That's the one with all the commandos, and they go in, and there's the guy that's leading the team of these colonial marines, and they're going in, and he doesn't pull them out. He's the one that sends them in without the ammo because they're in a reactor. Spoiler alert. And they get down there, and it's a freaking nest of aliens, and all of these commanders die, and he like freaks out in the moment, and he's totally a total like jackass. And Ripley's the one that's got to be like, get them out of there, you know. And she like rips it off of his head and drives the car through. Like, obscure villains are always really interesting, or the villains that aren't villains by every standard of the term, the people that like have to make the hard choices, and because they're the ones that make the hard choices, are they the villain, right? I even think about Deadpool 2. I love the Deadpool movies. Another great use of humor, and the second movie, you know, he gathers his team of this like ragtag group, and this guy has come back to kill this kid. That's like the whole reason he's here, to like reset the timeline, because this kid eventually turns bad and becomes the villain. But the kid's not the villain yet. The actual villain is the person there that's trying to shoot him, who's actually the hero of his own story, right? That's a really interesting perspective. So anyways, you asked me a tough question. I can't pick one, but I could go on for hours, so I won't.
I have another one. One of my favorites. If you would pick a character like that you instantly hate, for me, that would be Calvin Candy from Django Unchained, Leonardo DiCaprio.
Oh, interesting.
Like the moment Leonardo comes on screen in that film, you want to beat the living shit out of him.
Yes, you do.
He is so evil. Even like the director hated him. Like, even he himself hated his character.
So bad, yeah.
He was able to portray that, like, he was able to project that hate towards his own character to the viewer, to the players in the D&D campaign, and he is so like evil, right? And I think that's one of his best characters he ever played in his life.
It was you're actually, now that you say that, gosh, I'm thinking back to that movie. I think I saw that one in theaters. Somebody mentioned Killmonger, another great example of a villain that we feel for. We feel for Killmonger in a way, like we empathize, like there is a legitimate struggle there.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
Because again, that character is not the villain of their story, right? They're the the protagonist, right? And so, for me as a GM, I get really inspired by those kinds of characters where I can make my players struggle. Who is the bad guy? How do we make a choice? He's got a point, but they've got a point, or she's got a point, you know? Yeah. All right, well, we are at the end. We're actually already over time. We talked too much.
Yeah, that's because we're talking about something, movies.
We talked too much.
I can talk for hours about this.
Me too. Oh, me too. So next week will be our last week with our great guest here. I'm very excited for the next conversation, which actually was inspired by you, chat. Instead of talking about GMing, we're going to talk about being a great player. What do we look for in players? Like, what makes a great player at the table? What are some of the things that we do as players at the table to try to, bring our A game or make a great collaborative environment? So next week's going to be all about being a player, because that is just as important, in my opinion, as being a GM.
Absolutely.
And I would hope between the two of us and all the many hours that we've played on both sides of that table, we'll be able to maybe answer your questions. So, which is really, really cool. We can talk some more, and we will talk some more. Same Kobold time, same Kobold channel next week. But before we go, Mr. Tarrasque, tell everybody where they can find you online, and we'll close out with some Kickstarter information.
Type in Mr. Tarrasque on YouTube or Google or whatever. I'm probably the only person who goes by that name, so you'll just find me. YouTube.com/Mr. Tarrasque. Mr. like M-R Tarrasque. If you're into third-party Dungeons & Dragons content, if you want to get like the next book to add to your table and you have like not a lot of funds and you really need to know what to buy, you come to my channel and I advise you.
He'll tell you all about it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And it's all about positivity. I do not do negative reviews. If it's not on my channel, then I didn't like it, or I haven't read it.
You know what's actually interesting? You do reviews of one of my best friends' stuff quite frequently. Rimley Farr is one of my best friends in the whole world. And he's a writer, and he writes for a lot of stuff that you do reviews about. I just don't know if you know that or not. But anyways.
Yeah, I know the name. I see the name come up every now and then.
He and I grew up. We're actually like childhood friends. We grew up together. So he writes.
Awesome.
He does a lot of writing, which is lots. Very, very cool. He actually is the one that drugged me onto Twitch for TTRPG. So blame him as to why I'm here, y'all. Very, very cool. And don't forget, we do have a Kickstarter going on right now. That is for the Deep Magic spell cards. If you liked our Deep Magic book, why didn't it press... It'll happen here in a second. If you want to get your hands on the physical cards of all of those 1,400 spells that are in the Deep Magic Kickstarted book, you can do that, because we're now doing a mini Kickstarter for the next 2 weeks. It's a much shorter timeline, so you got to get it, and you got to get it now. You can see there on the screen, we have surpassed the 50% mark. So today is day 1, and we're already 50% there. Help us get all the way, and I believe that these are also going to start going into stores near you when it is funded as well. So get yours. Help us put them into stores, help other people get a set, and, get prepared for when you start actually getting around a table with your friends again. Now you can pass out spell cards, 1,400 of them, I heard, which is a lot. It's a lot. I believe it's 1,400 spells cards or something like that. It's crazy. They're organized by class. If you want to learn more, I guess it didn't pop up. I don't know why. Let's try again.
So there's 2 spell cards per spell.
28
there 700
decks of
spells
cards. Yeah, something 700 spells. There's like all kinds of things. I'm sure some of them duplicate across classes because they're organized by class, so maybe they have some duplicates in the packs. But they are. You can see the packs up there. There's an image on the screen for you. We've got it's pretty amazing, and you can learn more about it over on the Kickstarter. So even if you're not quite ready to fund it, go check it out. Learn a little bit more about it. See what we're up to over the next 2 weeks, and hopefully my hard copy deck will be here soon, so maybe we can show it off, do a thing, get hyped. So yeah, until then, we will see you next week when we talk all about being a player at a table, and what it means to be a great one. So until then, don't do anything we wouldn't do, and we will see you all next week. I'm going to leave you with this wonderful little video to remind you to go get your Deep Magic spell cards. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Imagine eldritch lore at your fingertips. Seize the power of the dark void or the blood within and shape it to your will. Channel divine might or unleash an apocalypse. These are Deep Magic spell cards. Choose bard, cleric, or druid, paladin, or ranger, sorcerer, warlock, or wizard. 1,400 spell cards in all, suitable for the 5th edition of the world's most popular role-playing game. Command Winter's Might or unleash hieroglyphic enchantments. Plunder the forbidden arcana of elves or dragons. Or break reality itself with temporal incantations. The choice is yours. Deep Magic spell cards. The power of the cosmos in the palm of your hand.